Clinical human maturity develops through one mechanism and one mechanism only: repeated, sustained professional presence in clinical environments where the reality of healthcare practice are normal and where you are required to meet those realities professionally every single day, regardless on how you feel about them. You cannot read your way into it. You cannot course your way into it. You cannot shadow your way into it in 40 hours. You develop it by showing up every day until the things that initially made you uncomfortable become normal. That is what a year as a rehab aide gives you. And then for the next few minutes, I want to show you specifically on what that development looks like and why it changes your application completely when everything else fails. Because what clinical work actually develops is not just observation hours and a new recommendation letter. It develops something committees are trying to find evidence of in every application and almost never find it clearly: clinical identity. Physical comfort in clinical environments, the ability to be present with full physical reality of human illness, injury, disability without your discomfort becoming a clinical liability. Bathing, dressing, wound care, bodily functions, these become normal, not because they stop being real, but because your professional presence becomes your default. Therapeutic use of self, the beginning of understanding that how you show up, your presence, your communication, your ability to build genuine therapeutic relationships is in itself a clinical tool. Feedback, receptivity, the ability to receive clinical feedback about your performance and use it to improve rather than defend against it. This is one of the most important professional competencies in healthcare, and it is developed through practice in clinical environments where feedback is constant. Professional peer maturity, the ability to function as a professional colleague in a team environment rather than a student who needs managing. And here's a specific clinical reality that most pre-OT content completely avoids naming directly, and that your year of clinical work will require you to develop maturity. This is the clinical topic that produces the most discomfort in the least experienced applicants. It is also one of the most important clinical areas in OT practice. Spinal cord injury, traumatic brain injury, multiple sclerosis, these conditions affect sexual function and intimate relationships. Clients and patients need to know that their clinician can discuss these topics professionally without making them feel ashamed for having these needs. An OT who can have that conversation professionally is not providing complete care. Developing the professional maturity to engage with this topic requires exposure to clinical environments where it is discussed professionally and normally. Rehabilitation settings, spinal cord injury programs, long-term care. The discomfort you might feel with me talking about this right now is information. It tells you where your clinical maturity might be lying right now and where you might need a little bit polishing up to do. Start over. Now, here is how all the clinical development shows up in your application in a way that changes how committees read your file completely. The applicant who spent a year doing clinical work as a rehab aide or similar writes observation descriptions that sound completely different from any other application. They do not just describe what the OT did, they describe what happened between the OT and the patient. They notice the therapeutic relationship. They observe the communication. They reflect on how a therapist's presence affected the clinical moment. That reflection demonstrates the beginning of therapeutic use of self-awareness, and it is visible to a committee in 30 seconds of an interview. The letter from a clinical supervisor who observed you in a clinical environment after the previous application is worth way more than any credential from a professor. That letter answers the question committees urgently needed answered. Is this person ready for what clinical training requires? And here is the documentation practice that turns your year of clinical development into the application with evidence, because experience without documentation is experience committees cannot see. Keep a clinical reflection journal throughout your development in the year you are an aide. Weekly entries, 3 questions every entry. What clinical reality did I encounter this week that challenged me or required me to grow professionally? How did I respond in the moment? And what did that response tell me about where I am and what direction I'm going in my development? What do I understand about OT practice or myself as a future clinician that I did not understand before? Those entries become raw material for every piece of your reapplication. Your personal statement is now built from the inside, from those entries. Your interview preparation is built from the specific moments documented in those entries. Your letter writer briefings reference the specific growth documented in those entries. Documentation transformed into lived experience and demonstrable professional development. And demonstrable professional development is what a reapplication needs to show. You changed. You grew. The year you spent developing clinical maturity is not a delay in your OT journey. It is the beginning of it. The applicant who arrives to OT school having spent a year in clinic as an aide, for example, has work that is much stronger than an applicant who didn't do anything or without any experience. They are a better clinician from the first day of fieldwork. They arrive having already been required to develop a clinical professional presence that clinical training demands. The rejection that brought you here may be the most professionally valuable thing that happened to you, not because rejection is good, but because of what you're going to do with it will determine the kind of clinician that you're going to become, and it's going to be great. My group sessions cover clinical maturity development and a reapplication strategy together. How to use your clinical work to build a really strong application the next year. Slots are available right now. Link is in the description. You found it. Now use it.